Right now, there is a war happening in the Middle East that could destroy the one system keeping America the most powerful country on earth. And no, I'm not talking about the military. I'm not talking about aircraft carriers or nuclear weapons or fighter jets. I am talking about something way more powerful than all of that combined. I am talking about the petrodollar. See, most people look at the Iran-Israel conflict and they think this is about religion. They think this is about territory. They think this is about who launched what missile at who, but that is the surface. That is the movie playing on your screen, while the real plot is happening behind the curtain. Because what is actually at stake right now is the financial system that has kept the United States dollar at the center of the entire global economy for over 50 years. 50 years. And right now, that system is cracking. The math is breaking. The geography is shifting. And the craziest part? Most people have absolutely no idea it is even happening. They are watching the explosions on the news, they are watching the political speeches, they are picking sides, and meanwhile, the actual game, the real game, the one that determines who controls the global economy for the next century, that game is being played right underneath their feet. So today, I am going to break this down for you. Not the version you see on CNN, not the version you see on Twitter, the real version. The version that is about money, oil, game theory, and the future of American power itself. Let me say this one more time so it really sinks in. The war between Iran and Israel is not just a military conflict. On the surface, yes, it looks like one. You see the missiles, you see the drone strikes, you see the retaliations, but underneath all of that, what is actually happening is an economic war. It is an attack on the financial engine that powers American global dominance. And this is not some conspiracy theory. This is not speculation. This is game theory. This is geography. This is cold, hard, brutal math. When you strip away the noise, when you strip away the media coverage and the political talking points, what you are left with is a calculated strategic assault on the system that allows the United States to borrow trillions of dollars, fund the largest military in human history, and maintain influence in every single corner of the globe. That system has a name. It is called the petrodollar system. And if you do not understand how it works, then you cannot understand why this war is happening, why it is happening now, and why the outcome of this conflict could reshape the entire global order for the rest of our lifetimes. So let me paint the picture for you. Right now, if you turn on any news channel in the world, here is what you are going to see. You are going to see footage of missiles flying through the sky. You are going to see explosions lighting up city skylines. You are going to see politicians standing behind podiums, delivering carefully written speeches about security, sovereignty, and the right to self-defense. You are going to see military analysts drawing arrows on maps, talking about strike zones and interceptor systems and casualty reports, and all of that is real. I am not saying it is fake. Those things are happening. People are dying. Infrastructure is being destroyed. The human cost of this conflict is enormous, and it should not be ignored. But here's what I need you to understand. In geopolitics, the things you can see are almost never the full story. In fact, the visible stuff, the missiles, the explosions, the speeches, that is usually just the top layer. The real story is always underneath. The real story is about incentives. It is about who benefits and who loses. It is about economic structures that most people never think about because they were designed to be invisible. It is about geographic choke points that control the flow of the most important commodity on the planet. And it is about a financial system so deeply embedded into the global economy that most people do not even realize it exists until it starts to break. So when people ask the obvious question, why is this war happening right now? The answer is not as simple as these countries hate each other. Countries have hated each other for centuries. Hatred does not start wars. You know what starts wars? Strategic systems under pressure. Systems that are beginning to crack. And right now, one of the most powerful systems ever built in modern history is under more pressure than it has faced in decades. That system controls how oil is traded. It controls how money flows, and it controls who sits at the top of the global power structure. That is what this war is really about. So let me show you what is actually going on. But before I get into the war itself, before I talk about Iran's strategy, before I talk about the missiles and the drones and the Strait of Hormuz, I need you to understand one thing first. And this is the thing that most people get completely wrong about power. People think empires survive because of their armies. They think the United States is the most powerful country in the world because it has the biggest military, the most advanced weapons, the most aircraft carriers spread across every ocean. And yes, all of that is true. The American military is extraordinary. But here is the part they do not teach you. Military power alone has never sustained an empire, not once in history. Every empire that has ever lasted, every single one, had an economic system behind it, a financial structure, a money machine that kept the whole thing running. And in the case of the United States, that money machine is built on one thing, oil, and not American oil, the world's oil. And the way that oil connects to the American dollar is one of the most brilliant and most fragile systems ever designed. Let me explain. Here is how the system works. Oil is the single most important commodity in the global economy, bar none. There is nothing else that comes close. Every factory needs it. Every airplane needs it. Every shipping container crossing the ocean needs it. Every car, every truck, every military vehicle on the planet runs on it. Modern civilization, as we know it, does not function without oil. Now here is the critical part. For over 50 years, almost all of the oil traded on the global market has been priced and sold in one currency, the United States dollar. Not the euro, not the yen, not the yuan, the dollar. Think about what that means for a second. If you are Japan and you need to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, you cannot pay in yen. You have to pay in dollars. If you are India and you need oil from the Gulf, you cannot pay in rupees. You have to pay in dollars. If you are Germany, Brazil, South Korea, it does not matter. Every single country that needs oil, which is every country on Earth, must first acquire United States dollars before they can buy a single barrel. Now, what does that create? It creates something incredibly powerful. It creates constant, never-ending global demand for the American dollar. Every single day, countries around the world are buying dollars, holding dollars, and storing dollars in their reserves just so they can participate in the oil market. And that demand is the secret engine behind American economic power. Because when the entire world needs your currency, you can do things that no other country can do. You can print money without destroying its value, at least not immediately. You can borrow trillions of dollars at low interest rates because everyone wants to hold your debt. You can fund the largest military in human history and station it across every continent and every ocean on the planet. You can run trade deficits year after year after year, and the system keeps working because the demand for your currency never stops. But this system did not happen by accident. It was built, it was engineered through very deliberate alliances in the Middle East, specifically with the oil-producing states of the Persian Gulf. The deal was simple and it was genius. The Gulf states, led by Saudi Arabia, agreed to sell their oil exclusively in United States dollars. In return, the United States agreed to provide military protection. American bases, American weapons, American security guarantees. The Gulf countries got a shield. America got the financial backbone of its entire empire. That is the Petrodollar system. That is the invisible machine running underneath everything. And as long as that machine keeps running, the United States stays on top. But the moment someone threatens to break that machine, everything changes. And that is exactly what is happening right now. Now, here is where most people get this conflict completely wrong. When they watch the news, they think the war is between Iran and Israel. They think the battlefield is in Gaza or Lebanon or on Israeli soil. And yes, those are active fronts. Those are real places where real fighting is happening. But they are not the main event. The real battlefield, the one that actually matters in the grand scheme of things, is the Gulf. I am talking about Saudi Arabia. I am talking about the United Arab Emirates. I am talking about Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait. These are the places that matter most in this conflict, and most people do not even realize it. See, these countries are not just wealthy nations sitting on top of oil. They are critical nodes in the global financial system. They are the infrastructure of the petrodollar. The oil they produce, the money they generate, the investments they make, all of that flows directly into global markets and reinforces the dominance of the United States dollar. Take Dubai as an example. Dubai did not become a global city by accident. It was built on one thing above everything else: stability. Wealthy people from all over the world moved their money to Dubai because they believed it was safe. Businesses set up headquarters there because the region was stable. Investors poured billions into real estate, infrastructure, and financial markets because they trusted that American military power would keep the Gulf secure. The entire economic model of these Gulf states is built on the perception of safety, not just actual safety, the perception of it. Now imagine what happens when that perception starts to crack. Imagine investors watching missiles fly across the Gulf region. Imagine wealthy expatriates looking at the news and wondering if their families are safe. Imagine insurance companies recalculating risk for every cargo ship passing through the area. What happens? Capital runs, money moves, businesses start looking for the exit, and when capital flees the Gulf, It does not just hurt Dubai or Riyadh or Doha. It weakens the entire financial ecosystem that the petrodollar is built on. The oil revenue slows down, the investments dry up, the recycling of dollars through global markets starts to break down. And this is where Iran's real strategy becomes terrifying, because Iran is not trying to beat the United States in a straight-up military fight. They know they cannot do that. No country on earth can match the American military in a direct conventional war. Iran knows this. So instead of fighting the machine, they are attacking the fuel that powers the machine. They are going after the economic foundations. They are targeting the Gulf. They are targeting the perception of stability. They are trying to make the entire region feel unsafe, unpredictable, and risky. And if they succeed, even partially, the financial damage could be far greater than anything a missile could ever do to a military base. Now let me show you why geography makes this whole situation even more dangerous. Because when we talk about the Gulf region, we are not just talking about countries and cities. We are talking about one of the most important geographic choke points on the entire planet. It is called the Strait of Hormuz. And if you do not know what the Strait of Hormuz is, you need to learn, because this single narrow waterway might be the most strategically important piece of geography in the modern world. Here is what it is. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passage of water that connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. In some places, it is only about 50 kilometers wide. That is it, 50 kilometers. And through this tiny corridor, roughly 20% of the entire world's oil supply passes every single day, 20%. That means 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil consumed on this planet travels through this one narrow choke point. Countries like India, China, Japan, South Korea, and dozens of others depend on oil shipments that come through this route. If that route gets disrupted, if ships cannot pass safely, the entire global energy market goes into shock. Prices spike, supply chains collapse, industrial economies that rely on imported energy start grinding to a halt. And here is the part that makes this a nightmare for the United States and its allies. Geography does not treat both sides equally. On the Gulf side, you have the oil-producing states: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain. These countries are mostly flat. Desert terrain, open, exposed, their critical infrastructure, their oil fields, their pipelines, their desalination plants, their export terminals, all of it sits out in the open, visible, and vulnerable. Now look at the other side. On the Iranian side of the strait, you have mountains, massive, rugged mountain ranges that stretch along the entire coastline, and those mountains are not just scenery. They are natural fortresses. Iran has spent decades embedding missile systems, drone launch sites, and military installations deep into those mountains, hidden, protected, nearly impossible to hit with conventional strikes. So what does that mean strategically? It means Iran can launch attacks against the Gulf from behind a wall of rock and stone. It can fire missiles at oil infrastructure, at shipping lanes, at desalination plants, and the defending side has an incredibly difficult time striking back effectively. Iran can project offensive power across the strait while sitting inside a defensive fortress. That is not a military advantage, that is a geographic gift. And it changes the entire calculus of this war, because as long as Iran controls those mountain positions overlooking the strait, it holds the ability to threaten the single most important energy corridor on Earth. Geography is not just the backdrop of this conflict, geography is the weapon. Now let me hit you with the math, because this is the part that most people completely overlook, and honestly, it might be the most important part of this entire conflict. We are used to thinking about military power in terms of technology. Who has the best jets? Who has the most advanced missile defense systems? Who has the biggest satellites, the smartest bombs, the most sophisticated hardware? And for decades, that is exactly how the game worked. The United States built the most technologically advanced military the world has ever seen. Stealth bombers, aircraft carriers, multi-billion-dollar defense systems. The assumption was simple. If you have the most advanced technology, you dominate the battlefield. End of story. But this war is flipping that assumption on its head. Here is what is actually happening. Iran is producing drones that cost roughly $50,000 each. Some cost even less. These are relatively simple machines. They carry a small explosive payload. They can be launched from hundreds of kilometers away. They are not sophisticated. They do not need to be. Now, in order to stop one of these drones, the defending side has to fire an interceptor missile. And that interceptor missile can cost anywhere from $1 million to $10 million, sometimes even more, depending on the system being used. So do the math. The attacker spends $50,000. The defender spends $10 million. The attacker is spending a fraction of a penny for every dollar the defender spends. And it gets worse. In many cases, the defending side does not fire just one interceptor at each incoming target. Sometimes they fire 2, sometimes 5. There have been reported instances where 10 or even 11 interceptors were launched at a single incoming missile or drone. 11 interceptors at $10 million each against a target worth $50,000. That is over $100 million spent to stop a $50,000 weapon. Now scale that up. Imagine hundreds of these drones being launched. Imagine thousands over the course of a prolonged conflict. Every single engagement is a financial victory for the attacker and a financial hemorrhage for the defender. Over time, interceptor stockpiles start running low. Supply chains cannot keep up. The defense industry, which was designed to build small numbers of extremely expensive weapons, cannot suddenly switch to mass production of cheap interceptors. The entire military doctrine, the entire economic model of warfare that the United States has operated under since the Cold War, starts to buckle under the weight of this asymmetry. And here is the deeper consequence that no one is talking about. For decades, there has been a global perception that American military power is unchallengeable. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the world believed that no one could seriously threaten the United States military. That belief was not just a matter of pride, it was a strategic asset. Countries aligned themselves with America partly because they believed its military shield was impenetrable. Investors poured money into American protected regions because they trusted that shield. The entire global order was built in part on the perception of American military invincibility. But what happens when cheap drones start punching holes in that perception? What happens when the math stops working? What happens when the world watches a $50,000 weapon neutralize a $10 million defense system on live television? The perception cracks. And when perceptions crack, everything built on top of them starts to shake. And now, here is the part no one is talking about. Let me tell you about the vulnerability that nobody talks about when they discuss the wealthy Gulf states. Because when most people think about countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, or Bahrain, they think about skyscrapers, they think about luxury, they think about some of the richest cities on the planet dripping with gold and glass and excess, and all of that is real. These are incredibly wealthy nations, but underneath that wealth, there is a vulnerability so basic, so fundamental, that it could bring entire cities to their knees in a matter of days. That vulnerability is water. Think about where these countries are located. They are in the middle of a desert, some of the hottest, driest land on Earth. There are no major rivers running through most of these nations. There are no massive freshwater lakes. Natural water resources are extremely limited, so how do cities with millions of people survive in the desert? They survive because of desalination plants. These are massive industrial facilities that take salt water from the sea and process it into fresh drinking water. In many Gulf countries, these plants supply over 60% of all available drinking water, in some cases even more. Without them, these cities do not just struggle, they collapse. Millions of people would face immediate, life-threatening water shortages within days. Now think about what that means in the context of a war. A desalination plant is a fixed target. It cannot be moved, it cannot be hidden. It sits right there on the coastline, requiring enormous amounts of energy to operate, completely exposed to missile or drone strikes. A single successful attack on one of these facilities could cut water production for millions of people overnight. Even temporary damage, even a disruption lasting just a few weeks, would create panic on a scale that is hard to imagine. And water is just one piece of the puzzle. Oil fields are spread across vast stretches of open desert. Pipelines run for hundreds of kilometers with minimal protection. Export terminals sit on the coast, fully visible from satellite imagery. Protecting every single piece of this infrastructure across thousands of square kilometers of flat, exposed terrain is practically impossible. You would need an air defense system the size of a small country just to cover it all. But here is the thing that makes this strategy so effective. The goal is not necessarily to destroy all of this infrastructure permanently. The goal is to create uncertainty, because uncertainty is its own weapon. The moment a single drone strikes an oil facility, global energy markets react. Prices spike. Insurance companies raise their rates for every cargo ship in the region. Shipping companies start rerouting their vessels. Investors start pulling their money. Businesses start reconsidering whether the Gulf is really the safe, stable place they were told it was. Even the possibility of an attack, even the perception of risk is enough to cause billions of dollars in economic damage. You do not need to destroy the system. You just need to make people doubt it. And doubt, once it starts spreading, is almost impossible to stop. Now let me introduce you to a concept that is going to help you understand exactly where this conflict is headed. In strategic studies, there is a model called the game of chicken, and it works like this. Imagine two drivers in two cars racing directly toward each other at full speed on a straight road. The rules are simple. The driver who swerves first loses. They are called the chicken. But if neither driver swerves, both cars crash head-on and both drivers are destroyed. The entire game is a test of nerve, a test of who is willing to take the bigger risk, a test of who blinks first. Now apply that model to the current conflict. On one side, you have Iran with its ability to threaten the Strait of Hormuz, to launch drones and missiles at Gulf infrastructure, and to destabilize the entire energy market. On the other side, you have the United States and its allies with the ability to strike Iranian infrastructure, target its energy production, hit its electricity grid, and damage its water systems. Both sides possess the ability to inflict catastrophic economic damage on the other. Both sides know this, and both sides are accelerating toward each other. The problem with a game of chicken is that escalation becomes self-reinforcing. Every strike demands a response. Every response demands an even bigger counter-response. Neither side can afford to look weak because looking weak invites more aggression. So each side keeps pushing, keeps escalating, keeps demonstrating that they are willing to endure more pain than the other. And with every round of escalation, the stakes get higher. The damage gets worse, the off-ramps get narrower. But here is the truly terrifying part. Miscalculation is always possible. In fact, in situations like this, miscalculation is almost inevitable. Leaders on both sides are making decisions based on assumptions about what the other side will do. They assume the other side has a breaking point. They assume the other side will eventually decide the cost is too high and back down. But what happens when that assumption is wrong? What happens when both sides believe the other will swerve first and neither one does? That is how conflicts spiral beyond anyone's original intention. That is how limited wars become unlimited ones. That is how economic pressure turns into full-scale infrastructure destruction. And that is where it gets really dangerous. Now, here is the uncomfortable conversation that policymakers in Washington do not want to have, but eventually will be forced to have. If the strategic objective of this conflict is to permanently neutralize the threat posed by Iran, then air power alone is almost certainly not going to achieve that. And this is not speculation. This is history. If you study every major conflict where one country attempted to force regime change on another through airstrikes alone, the pattern is clear. Bombing campaigns can destroy infrastructure, they can weaken military forces, they can create enormous economic pressure and suffering, but they almost never produce full political collapse by themselves. If the goal is to actually change the government of a country like Iran, history tells us that it almost always requires boots on the ground, ground forces, occupation, and that is where everything gets incredibly complicated. Because right now there is virtually zero appetite among the American public for another large-scale ground war in the Middle East. After decades of military involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, after trillions of dollars spent and thousands of lives lost, the American people are exhausted. The idea of sending ground troops into Iran, a country far larger and far more geographically difficult than Iraq, is politically toxic. No administration wants to be the one to propose it. No politician wants to campaign on it. But here is the tension. The Gulf allies, the countries whose entire economies depend on the stability of the petrodollar system, are watching their financial foundations come under attack. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, these nations are seeing missiles fly over their cities. Drones threaten their infrastructure, and investors question their safety. And they are turning to Washington and saying, "You promised to protect us. You gave us a deal. We sell oil in your currency, and you keep us safe. So what are you going to do about this?" That pressure is real, it is growing, and it puts American policymakers in an impossible position. And even if the decision were made to escalate to a ground campaign, the geography of Iran makes it a nightmare scenario. This is not flat desert like Iraq. Iran is dominated by mountain ranges that provide natural defensive cover across enormous stretches of territory. Missile systems and military installations are embedded deep inside mountains, hardened against airstrikes, and nearly impossible to reach without a massive ground operation. The terrain itself becomes a weapon of defense. Iran does not need to match America, plane for plane or tank for tank. It just needs to make the cost of invasion so high that no rational leader would attempt it. Meanwhile, both sides have the ability to target each other's civilian infrastructure. Electricity grids, water systems, transportation networks, industrial facilities, all of it becomes part of the strategic landscape. This is not a war confined to military bases anymore. It is a war about which society can absorb more damage, which population can endure more suffering, and which economy can survive more disruption. And that makes it one of the most dangerous types of conflict imaginable. So let me bring this full circle. Because everything we have talked about, the petrodollar system, the Gulf vulnerabilities, the Strait of Hormuz, the cost asymmetry of drones versus interceptors, the game of chicken escalation dynamics, all of it points to one outcome that should concern every single person watching this. The petrodollar system, the invisible engine that has kept the United States at the center of the global economy for over 50 years, is being stress tested in ways we have never seen before. And here's the thing about systems built on confidence. They work perfectly as long as everyone believes they will keep working. Oil keeps getting traded in dollars. Countries keep holding dollar reserves. Investments keep flowing through the same channels. Everyone trusts the system, so everyone keeps participating in it. It is a self-reinforcing cycle. But confidence is fragile. The moment major disruptions start shaking that confidence, the moment countries start wondering whether the Gulf is really stable, whether American military protection is really reliable, whether the dollar is really the safest currency to hold, that is when the cracks start appearing. And once the cracks appear, they spread fast. Countries begin exploring alternatives. Maybe they start trading oil in other currencies. Maybe they build new financial arrangements with China or Russia or regional blocs. Maybe they create new alliances that reduce their dependence on the dollar entirely. This is what people mean when they talk about a multipolar world. Instead of one dominant financial system centered around one currency and one superpower, the global economy starts fragmenting into multiple centers of power. Different regions build their own economic networks, their own financial institutions, their own strategic partnerships. Now, will that actually happen? Will the petrodollar system actually break? Honestly, no one knows for certain. Wars never unfold exactly as anyone predicts. Diplomatic breakthroughs can change the trajectory overnight. Economic adjustments can absorb some of the shock. Internal political changes on either side can alter the entire equation. But what this conflict has already done, what it has already proven, is something that cannot be undone. It has shown the world that the systems we all assumed were unshakable, the systems that seemed permanent and invincible, are now being tested. They are under pressure. They are vulnerable. And that revelation alone, regardless of how this war ends, has already changed the way nations think about the future of global power. So here's what I want to leave you with. If the systems that have governed the global economy for the last 50 years are now under real, measurable, visible pressure, the question is not whether things will change. The question is, what comes next? Will the existing order adapt and survive the way it has survived previous crises? Or are we watching the early stages of a complete restructuring of global power? Will the dollar remain the world's reserve currency for another 50 years? Or will new systems, new currencies, new alliances begin to take its place? These are not hypothetical questions anymore. They are playing out in real time right now on the battlefields and in the financial markets and in the diplomatic backrooms of the most powerful nations on earth. And the reason I make these videos is because I believe that understanding these forces, understanding the game theory and the geography and the economics behind the headlines is what separates people who actually understand the world from people who just watch the news and react. If you are the kind of person who wants to think deeper, who wants to see beneath the surface, then you are in the right place. Subscribe to this channel, drop a comment below, tell me what you think. Do you believe the petrodollar system can survive this? Or do you think we are witnessing the beginning of something entirely new? I genuinely want to hear your perspective because conversations like this are how we make sense of a world that is changing faster than most people realize. I will see you in the next one.